What's going on, everybody? The Digital Dungeon Master here, and welcome to episode number 8 of my Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Out of the Abyss campaign diary. And the whole reason for this diary is because this game is played 2 times every month on Thursdays, and it is not streamed live. It is not even recorded, actually. I take notes during the session, and then I translate those notes into this campaign diary story for all of you. So if you want to listen to this in podcast format and MP3, you can go to the Digital Dungeon Master podcast website, and the link is down in the description below. So where we left off last time, because remember, I had been talking the last couple of campaign diaries about transitioning this game, but still keeping it within the confines of the Abyss theme, to where I was going to start incorporating some pure dungeon crawling types of adventurers. You know, sort of like introducing some stuff from the Book of Layers from Kobold Press, introducing some stuff from the 4th edition Dungeon Delve book, which is a really good book that is really super simple to convert to 5th edition for all you DMs out there. And then I was going to take the new 5th edition Yawning Portal and incorporate some of those epic dungeons of the yesteryears into the game. So you guys knew I was going to do that. And this is the session where everything started to unfold. And last time, the party had kind of wrapped up some loose ends with Puck and Fergie. They were doing some bargaining with Mick the Peddler. So everybody had a chance to spend their money. And they did, because now the party's absolutely broke by this point. I think a couple people had like 5 gold or 10 gold, or I mean, literally, these guys are broke for level 5 adventurers. But they have a ton of magic items. I mean, I want this to be fun for the players. These guys are old schoolers, and they just love magic items. And you know, and I kind of interviewed them beforehand, trying to get a gauge of what type of game that I could cater to them. And I really recommend Dungeon Masters, instead of just going right into a game, kind of interview your players and get a feel for what they like. Because remember, if they're not liking the game, they're going to probably end up either not showing up anymore, stopping playing, or they're going to be surfing the internet or raiding in World of Warcraft while you're trying to run the game. So it's not fair to them, and it's not fair to you as a DM if if you're not keeping them engaged. So I recommend you, like I said, interview your players. So the players, they had all this economy control going on, and then they got onto the Slowpoke, which is a great story coming up about the Slowpoke. They started heading to Blingdenstone because Mick the Peddler, he had some dealings to do in the Dock District with some Mind Flayers. So the party took off. They asked if Drizzt was going to come, because I actually incorporated Drizzt Do'Urden, the famous Dark Elf of the Forgotten Realms and the Dark Elf trilogy and all the other trilogies that he's in books. But he wanted to go to Slubladop, which was west of Mick's Shanty. So they took off for Blingdenstone. This was going to trim about 12 to 14 days of travel time off of their journey. So I incorporated I wanted to have, there's not a lot of boat combat in D&D, unless you're playing some type of high seas game or a pirate game. Let's face it, there's not a lot of ship combat in D&D. So I wanted to, on the Slowpoke, as they were traveling to Blingdenstone, I wanted to have a ship combat. Not a ship-to-ship combat, but I incorporated the Drow Elves. And they were literally flying. They had fly spells. Actually, they probably either used a potion of flying or a scroll of flying, but who's keeping track of that? Then I also incorporated a couple of giant octopuses on each side of the Slowpoke, and also some swarms of quippers, which could really tear someone up. So there were multiple variables going on in this fight. And it was fun to watch everything unfold as, Eton brought out Dongbringer and started shedding light, giving the Drow disadvantage. That was great. That actually turned the tide of the fight, because at first, the Drow were just literally waylaying them. And then as, the Dongbringer was shedding light, then the tide started to turn. A couple of the party members got pulled off of the slowpoke by the giant octopus, and the Quippers started tearing up the drow elves. It was a good fight. And the party was victorious in the end. But one thing happened during all of this. Remember, Fingderella, liking shinies that she does, she knew that Mick had a bunch of money stowed upon the ship somewhere, and he actually found it underneath the poop deck, because the poop deck at the rear of the ship was about 10 foot above, and under the poop deck there was all of the crates and barrels and boxes that Mick the Peddler was going to take to Blingdenstone to trade with the Mind Flayers, which that's such a great story, and you're going to hear that in just a few minutes. So Fingderella went down there, picked the lock on the chest, and started helping himself. I think he took 3 big handfuls of gold. He was kind of being selective with the platinum and the gold. So remember that. He just didn't care. He kept saying, he's not going to miss this. It's just only going to be a couple of handfuls. He's not going to notice this at all. But with Minor Illusion at the end, when Mick, he doesn't trust Drow. Of course he trusts Drizzt. He went back there, saw gold was lying all over the floor, which was from Fingderella, by the way, splashing down into there with the boat rocking back and forth, with the tentacles of the octopus slamming into it and everything else. Mick counted the gold, but he was in the background using Minor Illusion, making more gold appear into the box, which was ingenious, and I know it seems far-fetched, but I love roleplay, and I love when players come up with ingenious ideas, and I like to entertain them. As long as there are some successful skill checks that I want, sure, what the hell. So he basically pulled a fast one over Mick. But Mick didn't have time to check his Seeing Eye stones that he had strategically placed under the poop deck, which was great. And Fingderella had no clue. And I had actually done a perception check to see if he noticed any of the Seeing Eye stones kind of glintering in the corners, and he never did. So after the fight, the party got to Blingdenstone, and they were escorted by guard through the castle area and the last resort defensive position, and they ended up in the inner part of Blingdenstone, and that's where we left off. And the only way they got into Blingdenstone is because they had Jim Jar with him, because he's a deep gnome. Mick the Peddler left him at the docks, and he said, farewell, friends. Maybe our paths will meet again. Oh, and they definitely are, because I know in the back of my mind, next session, oh yeah, they're definitely going to see Mick again. And by this point, when they're inside of Blingdenstone at the end, I heard a couple of comments. Wow, that was close, Fingderella. You really almost got us killed. He would have had Drizzt killing us. And I'm just thinking, you guys just wait till next session. It was awesome. And that's where we ended. So where we picked up for this session was at the entrance of Blingdenstone. And remember, they think that all this is over. And this is the game where I'm starting to transition from the Out of the Abyss story to my own generated story now. I mean, I like Out of the Abyss, don't get me wrong. It's pretty decent, but I think I can do much better taking the Out of the Abyss content and some other content from some other sources, putting it together for a hodgepodge story that will make a lot of sense and cater to my players, because let's face it, they're dungeon delvers and splunkers. They just want to go room to room, kick the door open, and roll initiative. They're old school gamers, and I am totally embracing that 100% because I want to keep them interested. And if they're not having fun in the game, which I know they're having a blast, I can just tell when players are having a good time and when they're not having a good time. And you as a dungeon master, you'll be able to tell too. I don't see any of their screens hopping around, changing colors on their face where they're surfing the internet or anything like that. I can see that they are engaged with this story. And I am so appreciative of that. And I know they're having a good time. So I think transitioning this game, like I said, is going to really make them have that much more fun. So as they're at the entrance of Blingdenstone, they're starting to, they're humans and elves in the Smirfneblin city, or the Smirfneblin Acropolis of Blingdenstone. And a couple of people come up, meet Jim Jar. They say, oh, we haven't seen you in a long time, Jim Jar. So they start telling Jim Jar about this were-rat problem. It's like a gang of were-rats. It's kind of going around and shaking down all of the local business owners. Because in Blingdenstone, it's sort of like in a transition period still, to where there's not even though there's a guard and a contingency of guards there to protect them from any kind of drow invasions, it's not going to be enough to actually protect them. But to the citizens' eyes, they're trying to do something. And it's really, there's not a lot of laws enforced either. So they're being told about this were-rat problem. And they're wanting to take care of this were-rat problem right off the bat. I mean, just as soon as they get in there, like, all right, we're going to deal with these guys, and we're going to help Blingdenstone. So they found out from the guards that were still at the gate. There's a couple of Smirf Neblin called Dorbo and Senny Digger Matok. And they basically, they're not the official king and queen of Blingdenstone, but they're the ones that pretty much run the show. They've invested a lot of money and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into getting Blingdenstone back to where it is now. And they're sort of like the unofficial titles that are sitting in the thrones there. So as they're fixing to go see the Digger Matoks, this is where I start incorporating the change. And a small little boy comes up, a small little Smirf Neblin with a Tiny Tim type of voice. He says,
Oh, hello. I've got a message from you from someone that's awaiting your arrival at the Foaming Mug.
Which is a great name. Mick the Peddler was waiting there for him. And at first they were going, what in the hell? Who the hell is waiting for us? And then all of a sudden, Club instantly started swallowing the microphone again and saying, fucked. Because he was doing that last time as Mick was engaged with Fingderella and the rest of the party trying to find out, what happened with all his gold. So now they're starting to say, oh, shit, we're in trouble now. So Club is saying he's effed, right? And now everybody's starting to rib Fang because they know that they're going to be guilty by association, all right? So the party, they arrive at the Foaming Mug Tavern, and they give the boy a couple of copper, and he goes on their way. So as they enter the Foaming Mug, they're greeted by a beautiful barmaiden that I had told them. She was actually an elf, and they were already Gugu and Gagan because I gave them basically an image of Liv Tyler back from Lord of the Rings. She could speak Elvish to me any day, by the way, guys. I just want to throw that out there. She could definitely speak Elvish to me. I wouldn't tell her to stop. So as they go in, Liv Tyler, of course, she takes him back to the Delmonica room, as they called it. It's the special VIP treatment room. So they're like, okay, this isn't so bad so far. And then the barmaid, she takes him over by the all-you-can-drink buffet. And I tell him there's everything there, every type of wine. There's 20 different spouts coming out of the wall with all this firish dwarven ale and stuff. I tell them there's even a bunch of umbrellas and little miniature long swords with cherries and pineapples and little mandarin oranges. And they're like, oh, wow. So they're role-playing this, and they're all talking about, I'm going to put one of these umbrellas into my drink, and I'm going to mix this a little bit with this mixer. And it was actually really nice. And like I said, guys, these guys were not role players at the very beginning. They were kind of ribbing me about it a little bit, but now they're really starting to warm up to it. And as a DM, it makes me feel so good. I'm like, maybe I'm kind of rubbing off on these old timers. And they're really not old timers. I mean, they're, my age, even probably a little bit younger than my age. Then they go and get a bunch of food that's already in the Delmonica room. And now it's time to have some freaking fun with Mick the Peddler. And remember, these guys are actually totally broke. They're totally broke. These guys have just a couple of gold. So when they go into the Delmonica room, Mick, he's all fat cat in it, you know what I mean? He's sitting back in his chair, drinking, eating, smoking. He's tilted back on two legs, and he says, "Ah, my friends, come on in." And he's just playing it off to where they're best friends in the world. And I know in the back of my mind, I'm fixing to just drop the frickin' hammer on him. So Club, he asks, hey, he's being all friendly with Mick. He was kind of being a little disingenuous with Mick last time, calling him, half pint and small fry. Because I think that was probably why Mick was kind of calling him Clubber and Flubber and, all these other orcish names. It was great. They had a great banter going back and forth with one another. So he even says, "Oh, how you doing, old friend? It's good to see you." And then they say, "How are you doing?" And of course they're going back and forth. Mick's asking them, "Have you seen any of the great sights in this shithole they call? This great city called Blingdenstone and all this stuff." And then they say, "Well, how have you been doing, Mick? How'd your deal go down on the docks?" And he goes, "Well, it's kind of funny you ask." And now it's showtime. And now Mick's attitude just totally shifts from jolly, pleasant, fat catnip to he puts the chair back down on the ground. He leans forward. He kind of tilts his pipe over, kind of knocks out the ashes, starts packing it again. And he's pissed off by this point. All of a sudden, the attitude just changes. There's see, when I'm dungeon mastering, I try not to use a lot of curse words. Even though I have the mouth of a sailor, I try not to use a lot of curse words because, let's just face it, some players just don't like that. But Mick, every other word out of his mouth was an F-bomb. I mean, every other word. And he's talking about, these fucking thieves and pardon my language when I'm saying this, effing thieves and, somebody robbed my effing gold on the slowpoke. And then he goes into talking about the deal with the mind flayers because they're real businessmen, he called them. He goes, "Yeah, these effing mind flayers, I've been doing dealings with them for a long time. These guys don't take any crap. They counted everything. I was short about 3 handfuls of gold." Now, and when he says a couple of handfuls of gold, now everybody's looking at Fingderella with daggers. They're like ready to kill Fingderella. And even the players were saying, "Holy crap, Dave, you don't even ever say that when you're playing." They're like, "We didn't even know you cussed." And then I'm still in character and I say, "It's because I'm effing pissed. I just lost the slowpoke. I lost all of my cargo on the slowpoke. These goddamn illithids, they're going back to my shanty. They're going to steal my shanty, all because I was short 3 handfuls of gold and I couldn't make my payment." And then something just popped on the top of my head. And then I started laughing when I said this. And I said, "I only had 4 damn payments left on the slowpoke. 4 payments. I've been paying on that damn thing for 10 years. So they get a chuckle out of that. But they know that Mick is pissed. I mean, like I said, he's short a payment. They repoed everything. And then he even goes on to saying that the mind flayers, they picked him up and literally pulled him and shook the money out of him. And he was describing that because "I was violated." And the whole time Club is saying effed in the mic the whole time. Really, he goes effed. And it was so funny. And Fingderella, he's wanting to get out of here now. And I described to Fingderella that there's a couple of guardsmen at the door that look like they will eat his asshole clean. And he's like, "Oh, this is great." They said, "Where's the nice Dave at?" I really got a chuckle out of that. Because usually, I'm not a real hard ass while DMing. But hey, they stole from Mick. Mick gave them great deals. Mick hadn't seen anybody in many years down in the Underdark. So it was a pleasant surprise to actually have some company. He gave him a lot of great deals. I mean, he gave him, 500 gold magic items and stuff for like 250, 350 gold. He really took a liking to him. because he doesn't get a whole lot of visitors. So they screwed him. So he's showing it. And of course, it reflects in my DMing style too. And they're kind of taken back by that. Now Mick asks them,
You guys wouldn't happen to know anything about this, would you?
and he's kind of eyeing them all up and down. And they all start to stutter, especially Fingerella. And they're like, no. In fact, Mick, we need to find out what happened. And we really need to help you. So I'm in the back of my head saying, God, these guys are really starting to get worried now. So Mick, sitting down, he stands up and he pulls out this small pouch. And he pulls out these 4 red stones, beautiful gems. And it was funny because Jimson actually said, are you going to steal those, Fingerella? They look like they got some value. I think he might try to steal them. But of course, that was out of character. They were just kind of bantering with Fing. I mean, by this point, they're all like checking pockets and making sure that Fing isn't stealing anything as they're standing there. They're really ribbing him, and I'm enjoying this. Like I said, Mick pulls out these 4 red seeing stones, and he puts one on every corner of the table. And then he kind of claps his hands a couple of times, and then all of a sudden, a reconstruction of sort of like a holographic image is how I portrayed it. And they're like, oh, great, now you're bringing sci-fi into this. So this, holographic image of the poop deck pops up. And, all of a sudden the fighting's starting. You can see Drow landing. This is how I'm describing it to the players. And then you see Fingerella run in, and Fingerella's looking around. And I actually gave Fingerella that perception check, just a random perception check, to see if he was going to see these stones and the corners of the top of the, under the poop deck where everything was stored. And he didn't. He failed. It was a bad check. And so it's showing him breaking into the chest and stealing all of the gold and splashing it all over the ground and stuff. And by this part, Fing is now sweating bullets. And actually, we're playing with webcams too. And he actually genuinely looks nervous as I'm looking at him in the webcam. And it's great because I know that this is affecting him. And that's when he's like, man, I might try to take a run for this. And I told him, sure, you can try to do this, but these guards, they really look pretty balls of the wall, like I had already previously explained. And now he doesn't go for the door. He starts to backtrack. And he's, telling Mick that he's broke and he's got this. He's just making up all this crap. And Mick doesn't have anything. And in fact, Mick tells him just to shut up, sit down, and stuff a steak in his face. And he says, you are in no position to talk to me right now and try to negotiate your way out of this. And now the party is like, oh, crap, man. We're like, what can we do, Mick? What can we do to make this right? And Mick is like, well, you can off this bitch here. And he says that she's a horrible rogue, and he knows a rogue that they could actually hire. He's a rogue for hire, and his name is Fargus Rumblefoot. So I remember Fargus Rumblefoot was already in the adventure, and he died, and he came back as a zombie. So Mick is friends with Fargus Rumblefoot, and he's like, oh, he's talking up Fargus. I know Fargus Rumblefoot. He'll do you a good job. Just off this bitch, or I'll just give her to the mind flayers. And now Fing is like, holy crap, these guys are going to really do this. and Puck's saying, yeah, I have proficiency in thieves tools and stuff, so we don't need Fingerella. And Fing is actually genuinely hurt by this. I mean, he's like, wow, thanks a lot, guys. And a couple of them are like, well, we told you not to steal. And then Puck said, I should have shot you with that. He said, I had you in my sights. I should have shot you when I had the chance. And he's like, wow, guys, I didn't know. So all this is going down. And now Mick, he starts to go into... So, well, first off, he says, what do you think Drizzt would say about all of this? And he said, even Drizzt took a like to you. And then when Drizzt goes back to the shanty, he's going to be informed by the Mind Flayers that I don't own this establishment anymore. What do you think Drizzt's going to find out when he finds out? What do you think he's going to say about all this? And they're like, oh, crap, we're going to have to fight Drizzt Do'Urden now. And, man, it was actually pretty worrisome for the party. They're getting worried, and they're starting to, hey, we need to help you, Mick. What can we do? And he tells them to get rid of Fargus, and they're like, Fing says Fargus is dead. And he goes, I haven't heard from Fargus in a while. How do you know that he's dead? And Fing pulls out his thieves' tools, and it had FG on it, embroidered on the kit. And he puts it on the ground, and he slides it over to Mick, and he says, because Fargus is dead. And now Mick is like totally pissed. And Mick just kind of goes silent for a couple of minutes. And then he comes, and then he says, just eat for a little bit. I need to ponder on this. So everybody's just kind of like talking and whispering to themselves. And Mick, he kind of snaps out of it, and he says, look, I'm going to tell you guys, I want my stuff back. I just lost everything. And you told me you want to make this right. And I want you to make it right for me. So he tells them about an old ruined area in the northeastern part of Blingdenstone. And it just kind of happened to work out perfect between Out of the Abyss, the Blingdenstone map. It just kind of worked out perfect because there's this ruined area in the northeastern coast, as you can see on the map above me. And that's where I put the Shrine of Tamoachin, because it's a ruined temple, right? So this is where I'm incorporating the level 5 Shrine of Tamachoa. And it's for level 5, but they're level 4. But I think they're going to be okay. Anyway, they've got 6 players. They'll be fine. I'm not even worried about it. And plus, by this point, I'm kind of getting away from the milestone way of leveling. We're going to go back to experience parcels. And we're going to do it the old school way, to where every encounter, they're just going to keep adding experience, which I'm actually kind of happy about doing that. And I've done that in all of my games as well. I've even done it with Adventures League, my Ghost of Dragonspear Castle game, and the actual Yawning Portal game that I'm running. We're doing experience parcels and everything. I don't have any milestone stuff going anymore. So Mick tells them about this old abandoned temple, and Mick tells them that there's something inside of this temple that he wants. It's some altar for the vampire god of the underworld. Some shrine, some altar. Mick doesn't even really, know too much about it. All he knows is that he could probably sell it to the Mind Flayers as part of the money that he's going to need to get everything back. The Slowpoke, his shanty, all of his equipment, all of his stockpile of magic items that he's been, in business for over 350 years, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, oh, and by the way, this is just the first item that I want, because I want a total of 5 items. And remember, I said in last episode that I was going to bring Mick the Peddler in and keep him around because the players really enjoyed Mick. And I'm going to keep him around as like a Star Trek Next Generation Q type of character. So when they find this, if they find the Vampire God of the Underworld Shrine, they're going to have to find the next thing. And by then, I'll already have everything planned out. But for now, they're going to be in the Shrine of Tamachoa for a while, which is going to be fun for them because it's just room-to-room dungeon crawling like what they want to do. And the party's like, well, why do we have to get 5 items? If you can sell this vampire god of the shrine, the underworld shrine, for a lot, why does it have to be 5? And he says, because you're going to have to give me 1 item for every handful that thief stole from me. And even though Fingarella only stole 3 handfuls of gold, Mick's wanting 5 because Mick's a businessman. And none of them even said anything. Even after the game, Fingarella said, hey, didn't I only take 3 handfuls of money? And I said, yeah. I said, but why didn't you say anything to Mick? He goes, I'm not that crazy. He says, you were on a roll, Dave. There's no way that I was just going to sit there, shut up, and just take what Mick had to offer. I said, yeah, you're pretty lucky that you didn't try to escape too, because those guards, they would have hit you. I said, they were all plus 15. They were all level 20 fighters. And I said, it wouldn't have lasted but about a round for you. I said, because I would have action surged and then got 4 more attacks, and you would have had, 8 attacks times 2 on you in 1 round, you would have been dead. And he was like, wow, you were going to do that? I said, if you tried to escape, yeah. And I said, that's what happens. You steal from Mick. Mick doesn't like this. I said, I hope you guys still like Mick. And they said, oh no, we love it. And I said, and they were like, and they even know now that this isn't part of the Out of the Abyss, because they know that Mick the Peddler was, thought of by one of my friends, West River Rat. And I told them about that. And they're like, well, we know that Mick the Peddler isn't in this, and we like what you're doing, transitioning, not only doing true Out of the Abyss stuff, but they like how I'm incorporating my own created content. And now they actually found out that this is the Shrine of Temachoa through history checks and stuff like that we'll talk about later. But I could tell that they were really liking the way that this game kind of transitioned. So they had to find these 5 items, and Mick said, once you find the first one, you bring it back to me, and then you'll have 4 more to get. And that's pretty much where they ended the conversation with Mick. Everything was silent from there on out as they ate and as they drank, and they knew that they were going to have a very long, a short journey to the temple, because it's only in the northeastern corner, but they knew that they were going to be in this temple for quite a while. Because Mick had actually even talked it up to where, this place has got a lot of old relics, and you can keep everything that you find. I don't want anything. I just want that vampire god shrine of the underworld. That's all I want. And then I'll give you your next task. And then he said after the party finds all 5 of the items that he wants, he's going to personally take them to the underworld. Because hopefully by that time he'll have his apparatus of Quailish back, and he'll be able to pile everybody in the back. And then he said he's going to take them to the surface world. So then it will still be Out of the Abyss, and then they'll have the opportunity to come back down and finish off this Demogorgon and stuff. So I think that's going to be a great story, actually. It's going to be Out of the Abyss, but it's not going to be Out of the Abyss, if you know what I mean. Now, Mick, before they leave the Delmonica room and the actual Foaming Mug Tavern, Mick tells them,
don't you even think about skipping out on this, because if you do, I'm going to sick a certain dark elf on all of you.
And they were like, holy crap, we can't dip out on this. And Puck, remember I told you that Mick had 2 of those alchemy jugs, and that Puck and Eton were kind of fighting over it because Eton bought it out from under Puck just as Puck was fixing to buy it. Well, Puck steps forward and he says, Mick, and he actually sounded pretty nervous. And he said, Mr. Peddler, he called him Mr. Peddler. He said, I have one request. And he says, yeah, what is it, pretty boy? And he says, you have that extra alchemy jug, right? And he says, well, if I get my stuff back from the Mind Flayers, I suppose I'll have that. Why? And he says, well, we'll do all of this for you. And if we are still living afterwards, you get all of your stuff back. You get your shanty back, your cargo, the slowpoke. Will you give me that alchemy jug? He wanted to, of all that, he wants the damn alchemy jug. And he said, you know what? I'll take that deal. And Mick stands up on the chair and then steps up on the table and kind of walks through all the food over to Puck that's on the other side of the table. And he sticks his hand out and he says, you've got a deal. So Puck shakes his hand. And then on the way out, they were like, okay, are you coming, Eldith? Are you coming, Jimjar? And he says, oh, by the way on that, Eldith and Jimjar, they're going to be staying with me. They're going to be my personal They're going to be my personal guest here at the Delmonica room. Oh, and by the way, seeing that you stole all of my money and made me lose everything, you're going to have to pay for the tab that we're going to be racking up on you guys, partying our asses off. We got to eat, you know. So now they're going to have this exorbitant amount of money to pay back to the foaming mug. I'll probably make it at least be a couple hundred gold or so. But by the time they're out of the Shrine of Tomoe-chan, they'll have plenty of money. But it's just one more kind of like dagger in the back as they head out. Now, when they're leaving, they're saying, okay, now the shit's probably going to hit the fan. And none of us have... Now they... Remember, multiple campaign diaries ago, I talked about... I didn't say anything else about healing potions or having a healer or anything like that. And now they're starting to get worried because they're going to need a cleric now. And they're like... They're trying to search around Blingdenstone for a cleric that they can hire. And I told them that nobody even wants to go near those ruins in the northeastern corner of Blingdenstone. So now they stop by the Lion Shield Coster, and they don't have any money. They forget that they don't have any money. So they're going in there wanting to buy all these healing potions, and then when they're looking at their sheet, they're like, oh yeah, that's right. We spent all our money. But Fingderella had money. Fingderella actually pulled a pouch out that had actually quite a bit of money in it and gems that he never spent. So the party's like, so did you steal all that? So they're really giving him a hard time. I'm starting to think, man, maybe they're going a little bit overboard on Fing. But Fing does the right thing, and Fingderella buys, I think, 12 or 13. He had enough to buy like 12 or 13 healing potions. And he split them up between everybody. So everybody got like 2 healing potions apiece. And then I think he gave the extra one to Fergie to administer to someone. So that was pretty cool to see, spend all of his money. And the whole time as they were on their way to the Lion Shield Coster, he kept apologizing the entire time. So they're actually role-playing this, and it's good. And I keep saying this, but it's nice to see them role-playing more and more and more and more. And it seems like it just keeps getting better every session. So they spend the rest of their money, and they pool their money together. They get all these potions, and now they're off to the Shrine of Tomoe-chan, this pyramid. And as they're approaching the shrine, I'm talking it up as... There's sort of like a thunderstorm that's just in the northeastern corner with all this lightning happening and thunder. And as they start to get into the ruins, this is where I have the ground give away under them, and it just opens up into a chasm, and they go down. And they're saying, okay, now the shit's really hitting the fan. So I give them all bludgeoning damage, and now they're inside the first chamber to this the Shrine of Tomoe-chan. And bam, this is where they want to be. I mean, they just want to go from room to room. Now, Club, he brings up a good point. Because remember, he bought the Ring of Feather Falling, right? And he goes, well, Dave, would I still take the bludgeoning damage? I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. Because I can't remember every single little detail about every single little character. But he had a valid point. And I said, you know what? You don't take the fall damage because of your Ring of Featherfall. It makes you slightly, go to the ground. But the other 12 large chunks of rubble that hit you on the head still knock you out. So everybody starts laughing about that. And they're like, man, you are not getting past anything. Anything's getting past Dave tonight. So that was pretty fun. So they all started coming to. And the first thing that Fergie does is he starts checking all of his jewelry and start checking the rest of his belongings to see, and as he's giving a dagger-piercing peer over towards Fingderella. So they're still giving Fing hell. Even though he just did all this, they're still really not trusting him. And I like that role-playing. So they're in the first chamber, and I believe it's the Vault of Chico Maztak. And there could be an encounter in here, but they chose not to do it. I know that they haven't read this or anything, because I could just really tell. But inside of this chamber, there are alcoves on each of the walls, the north and south walls, which are on the left and right of them. And in each one of these alcoves, there's like a 10-foot wide platform that's about 4 feet up in the air, and it has a bunch of figures and dioramas on them. And each one of these dioramas, they kind of tell a story, like, you know, the tribe down kneeling and praying. Maybe one of the tribal warriors was telling a story to a bunch of children. There was a couple dioramas of hunting and fishing and all that. And if they would have messed with any of those dioramas, which they didn't, then all of them, I was going to bring them all to life and just gangbang them with like 40 or 50 creatures. But they never messed with it. So they missed out on that experience, but that's okay. You know, they don't have to mess with every single little thing, because they're like, well, maybe we shouldn't really touch anything in here. And they were wanting to, and they almost did a couple times, but then they kind of reneged on it and said, let's just kind of go ahead. We're here to find this, you know, vampire god of the underworld shrine or altar, whatever Mick wants. But they did look around and they didn't find anything. So they start to head out of the western chamber, which is to the north. Actually, it looks north on the map visually, but it's actually west and east because of the map is kind of rotated 90 degrees. So Thing takes a charge and wants to start trying to figure out where the heck they're at. And he starts doing all of these history checks and actually rolls a crit. And I reward him and tell him that he thinks because of all of the, you know, this looks like an old Ulman Empire, which it is. And I tell him that he was versed in the Ulman Empire and that this is possibly because of, they found out that this is Chico Maztalk, you know, they could find that out. And I said, this looks like an old, this could be the shrine of Tomoe-chan. And then I said, you recall that this is probably in the jungles of Cholt somewhere, but how did it end up here in the Underdark, and how did it end up in Blingenstone? So he starts relaying all of this information to the other party, but he had a couple of really nice clutch history checks that he was able to find out all this information. And then at the end he said, Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. So they don't know if they're in Cholt. They don't know if they're still in the Underdark. And they're really kind of wondering what the hell is going on here and why they're in this temple. And you know, it's working out really good. I've got them asking a lot of questions, and they're going to find things out later down the line. So Thing is like wanting to make it up to the party, right? He knows he screwed up. And he was blaming it on the firewater he was drinking a couple weeks ago when he was actually stealing all this. I think they were, what the hell were they? I don't know. I can't remember the drink that they were drinking, Fuego or something. I don't know. But he was blaming it on the firewater. But he takes charge. You know, they head out the western end. They find a long corridor. They start to travel down the corridor, and Thing's like, no, I got this. You know, I'm making this right with you guys too. And then he actually kind of makes a comment. I wish you guys would stop telling me that you're looking through all of your equipment, making sure it's all there. And then a couple of them kind of ribbed him back for that. But as they're traveling along this corridor, there is a couple of like caves that are offset into the walls. And Thing, he's looking at it. He goes, oh, it looks pretty clear, which he rolled a critical fumble on his investigation check. I said, yeah, they just look like a couple of caves. So it's like, okay, we'll come back to these caves later. Well, there was a trap there, and a couple of logs came out as he passed by. I locked the tokens up, and he said, oh, shit, I'm fixing to die, I think. So he failed the perception check, and a couple of logs came out and just smashed him in the center of the hall, and actually almost took him out. It was supposed to be a 2d6 damage roll, but I'm ramping up everything on these guys, because these guys, they say they can handle it. They say that it's been a cakewalk so far. So I smashed them with like 66 damage. And then I said, welcome to the big time, boys. Welcome to level 4 and level 5 and multi and triple attack and stuff. And they were like, holy crap. So Thing almost dies. And but they continue on anyway. And then they come to this oddly shaped room. And when they're chugging healing potions by this point. Fang chugs a healing potion. I just wanted to, so I think there's like 13 potions left. So they come to this octagonal room, and there's this giant crayfish that they see that's kind of wallowing around in the mud. And it looks like there's a couple of other large sticks that are sticking out of this pile of dung in the middle of the room. So the party, they don't even ask any questions. They just go right in to attack. And when they run in, the mud is so slippery. I'm making them do acrobatics checks and stuff. So now there's another variable involved that they're going to be slipping and sliding everywhere. And in Club, he runs in, he fails his check, he falls prone at the base of this huge giant crab that appears out of the middle pile of dung that was in the middle of the room. And this hermit crab was getting 3 attacks around. I was giving it 3 attacks around. And it had the initiative on Club, and it took Club down in 3 hits. And Club's a barbarian. He wasn't raging. If he was raging at the time, he would have been fine because of the resistance with the slashing, the piercing, and the bludgeoning. But this crab, man, appeared out of the dung and smashed him 3 times with advantage because he was prone, and a melee attacker will get advantage. Smashed him 3 times, took him down. I mean, he didn't even, all he saw was 3 huge claws coming at him, and he was out unconscious. And one of these, the crayfish was named Kalka. And eventually, they administer a potion, so there's 2 down now, to Club. Club comes back up. They have a great fight. These creatures, I'm giving them 3 attacks around. It's 6 on 2. These guys are getting multiple attacks and stuff. They're getting like 12 attacks around. I'd say they're probably getting about 10. So I give the crabs 6. And that's how I adjust the encounters. It depends on how many people's in the group for that night. And then I just kind of play it by ear. And I highly recommend all of you DMs doing that as well. Because a lot of the monsters in 5th edition, they don't scale well to the players, which I don't think they're supposed to anyway. It's supposed to be a player-friendly game, but I don't want it too player-friendly to where I get comments saying this has been a cakewalk so far. And so I'm not going to make it a cakewalk anymore. I'm going to let them have it. So Club goes down, they get him back up, they eventually take out the big crab, the crayfish, knows that it's been bested, and it basically stops. It's clicking its little claws, speaking in Omen. They can't understand what this thing is saying. It's like kind of blowing bubbles and stuff. And that's when Stool comes in. I didn't mention this, but Stool was still with the party. And Mick told them to take Stool because if they didn't, the cook in the back was probably going to take Stool, cut him up, and put him on the buffet room out there. Put him on the buffet bar. So they had Stool. And I wanted them to have Stool just in case if there was any language barriers. So they said, oh, Stool's here. So that's when Stool came out, did his sporish ejection, and they could communicate with Kalka, which was the crayfish. And they were basically communicating back and forth. And they were saying, why did you attack us? The party members. And Kalka said, dude, you attacked us first. We've never attacked anybody. We're just, eating bugs and hanging out in here. We've been put in here since we were, small little crayfish and a small little crab, and we've grown our whole lives in here, and we've never left this room. So they've asked about other adventurers, and they said, yeah, many adventurers have come through here and passed, and they've passed in all the different chambers to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west, but we've never seen them again. They never come back, which is true because they all end up dying in here. So the party, they said, all right, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, let's go ahead and head down. So they headed down, which was east. And the next thing they ran into was like a slimy room. It was not a very big room. But nonetheless, they all entered in. It was pitch black. And they lit a torch. Jimson did, because he's blind as a bat in the darkness. And Club had a clutch perception check because even though there was a small little green slime, I actually made the entire green slime cover half of the room. And with a great perception check, and in this room, the ceiling kind of looked like the nighttime sky. So they didn't know if they were outside. If they came back outside, they didn't know what, because I said they felt sort of like a slight breeze. It was nighttime in this room. And then I explained how, the ceiling had stars and constellations. And then they started doing perception checks. And I was surprised that Club did this. Club's usually just smash, kill. But he wanted to do a perception check to see if he remembered any of this from a kid, because he actually started role-playing and said, hey, I remember the elders of the tribe would tell us these stories of the stars. And I was like, is this the same Club that's been in the game for 7 other times? But it was ingenious. So I let him do a nature check. And he had a great roll. And I said, yes, you remember that all of these constellations were how they would bless you in battle, your tribe in battle and stuff. So yes, you remember these constellations as a child. But as you're looking at the constellations, you also notice that there is some type of transparent glimmer that you can see kind of moving around. And then I said, it looks like something that you've noticed before, a huge slime that's looking like it's looking for prey. And he said, okay, so let's back away. So they started backing away, and it was perfect. Club was great with that. And, I even gave him inspiration for that. And I'm really starting to tone down on the amount of inspiration I'm giving, too. I was giving them inspiration just left and right. And now last couple of sessions, I've really been chintzy on the inspiration. I mean, I was giving them, just for saying a funny joke or something, I was giving them inspiration. But I'm really starting to make them get a little bit more. Even though, the game's been serious. The great game has been unbelievably fun. I'm kind of ramping it up a little bit more on them because they said it was a walkthrough. I don't want it to be a walkthrough for them. I want them to enjoy it. I want them to say, wow, that was actually hard. That was a fun fight. And that's what I want. But I know that they're having fun. So as they're all kind of avoiding the slime, they see on the other side of the room, as sort of like they come around the wall, there's like a pedestal that's about 4 foot up out of the coming up from the floor. And they see that there's this shot, because the light is kind of glinting off of Jimson's torch. And I tell them that there's like a metallic looking pyramid that's sitting on this pedestal. So now they don't even know if they want to take it. They're like, does it look like the vampire altar that we're looking for? And I said, not from what it looks like. No. And they bypass the slime. They really take a lot of precautions on this. And Club, again, seeing that he's already had a great check with the constellations, I told him to go ahead and give me another check with advantage, because he's already found out a bunch of information. But then I told him that this pyramid he recognizes as Apoc Ataquil, or Ataquatl, or something like that. And I think that's what it was. And I told him that it really doesn't have any significance, but it does look like it has a little bit of value. So Fing checked it out, he wanted to check to see if there were any traps or anything on it. No. They went ahead and bypassed the slime. I actually gave them full XP for, instead of fighting the slime, they just avoided it, which was fine. I gave them full experience as if they did kill it. They even thought about, standing back and just firing upon it, but they decided not to do that. They didn't want to waste any arrows. But I said, Puck, remember, you've got the bow of many arrows. You're not wasting any arrows because it has unlimited. And he goes, oh, that's right. He goes, we'll just bypass it. So I was like, okay, that's cool. So next, they were still going east, which is down. And then they found a long corridor. And Fing is still leading the charge at this point. I tell him that the water's trickling out of the huge room with the constellations and stuff like that. And there's a stream that's kind of running, and you can see that it travels from north to south, which is from right to left. And Fingdarella, as he's slinking down the hall, sees that there's a huge statue that is on the right-hand side, on her right-hand side. And this statue, there were some gems that caught his attention, looked like gems in the eye sockets. And there was a longsword on its back sticking up. So they were like, man, do we want to mess with this? Or why is this statue here? They're really starting to get technical as to why this statue's here. Why is it in the hall? Does this water have any significance? Are we going to get electrocuted? They started looking for any kind of like ports in the ceiling. They were looking for ports on the opposite double door that was there in front of them, about 10 foot away from the statue. They were looking for holes in the opposite wall as they turned the corner. They were really starting to get technical, and I was appreciating that. But the statue had no significance at all. It was just for decoration. There was no traps, nothing like that. So Club helped, after both Puck and Fingerella gave the statue a once-over, they found out that there was no traps, or so they thought, and they climbed up. Fingerella got the first gem out, but broke the second gem out of the eye socket. So instead of, they were 100 gold apiece, so as he broke the second one, I said that the value's probably 50 gold now. And then they found the sword. Well, the sword was really cool. It was actually a wooden scabbard with a wooden blade, but instead of it was still sharp because it had sort of like a sharp obsidian edge that was like fixated to the wooden. They're like, wow, this is really cool. So they went ahead and, they took that because it was in a scabbard on the back of the sword, and it was a long sword. So they kept it. And they open up the next double doors. There was nothing going on there. And as they open up the double doors, they found that there were a couple alcoves to the right and to the left of them. And then it opened up into a huge chamber. Well, this is the chamber of Saman Awak. And there is basically the Lord of Snails is in here. And the Lord of Snails is supposed to be in the big chamber. But I wanted to change this up for next encounter. Well, for the next session, because we were kind of running short on time. It was getting towards the end. So they decided to go ahead and take a rest here. And I think we had like 30 minutes left. We play for 4 hours. So it was about midnight, and we play till 12:30. So we had about 30 minutes. They wanted to take a rest. They wanted to find out what this sword was. And they kind of they were actually talking about going through each of their inventories and finding out what they had, oil-wise, torch-wise, ration-wise. They were really, really getting into it because they knew that this is what they wanted to do. And once they found out that the Shrine of Tomoe-chan was where they were at, they all knew that they were going to be here for a while because they couldn't get out the way that they came in because of everything basically just collapsed in on them. So they knew that they were going to have to find a way out, and they knew that they were going to be here for a long time. So they wanted to take a long rest in these two alcoves. So I went ahead and I said, okay, guys, you guys want to take an 8-hour rest? Go ahead. And then I let them do a random encounter in the dice tower. And even though there wasn't an encounter, I wanted an encounter anyway. So as they were, half of them were up in the northern alcove, the other half were down in the southern alcove. I made the Lord of Snails come out of the southern alcove, as you can see on the image above me. And in the northern alcove, I put a couple swarms of rats that came out of that fountain. And the combat was on. And this was going to be pretty much the last 30 minutes. And, they found out that, they had this fight. I don't think anybody went down. But they found out afterwards that, they found out that this was like the Slug Lord. And because they found, Club actually wanted to dive down into the fountain. The fountain to the north, I said, was very shallow. And they took, one of them had an extendable 10-foot pole, and they looked in the north fountain, and there was nothing in it. But the southern fountain I made a lot deeper, and they couldn't reach the bottom with a 10-foot pole. So Club, during the rest of their rest, he basically took off his armor, took off all of his clothes and stuff. I mean, he's a barbarian. And he dived down, and he found an amulet. And he was actually, yet again, Club, with actually the help of Fergie and Jimson this time, they were all able to find out that the giant slug, which is named Teku Z's Tekadol, they found out that was the slug. And that's when they all said, oh, yeah, wow, we're really here. This is the omen Empire. Wow, this is a shrine. How, and now they're still asking, how did the shrine get here in the Underdark? Or did Mick teleport us to the jungles of Chult? Because that's where Fingdarella, recalling all of the lore about the Omen Empire, was like, hey, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. So they identified the sword, which was called the Plant Slayer, and it acts as a normal sword. It's magical, and it gets an additional, I think, D6 or D8 if they attack any kind of like plant-like creature. And that's pretty much where we left off for the night. Now, the large chamber in the room here, I want to make this a bigger encounter. I want to put some Yuan-Tis. So I'm going to do some Yuan-Tis and some Bullywugs in this next room. And I'm going to use some of the Volo's Guide Yuan-Tis. I'm not going to use the Yuan-Tis. I might throw out a couple of the Yuan-Tis in and the Bullywugs in the Monster Manual, but these are pretty much going to be the Volo stuff. And it's going to be a pretty tough encounter for them. They just had a long rest. I'm going to make them use some of their magic, and we'll see what happens. I'm going to make this probably about a challenge rating 6 encounter, 6 or 7, and we're going to see how they handle it. I'm not out to kill them. I'm just, now that they're a little bit higher level, I'm just out to gauge what they can handle, because I'm going to be changing a lot of this stuff in here, and I'm going to be adding some more traps and stuff like that. So there you go. That was the first session that we actually transitioned the game into. You know what I was thinking? I could also add in maybe a couple water elementals too, because there's a lot of water in this chamber. And you can see the yellow circle on the map there. That's Dawnbringer. That's the light radius, the big, huge radius of light that Eton is shedding with that sword. And I'm going to counteract that from time to time with Dispel Magic. I'm going to put some anti-magic shells around in the rooms and stuff. That way, every time they run into something with sunlight sensitivity, it's not going to be a cakewalk, and they're going to, the creatures are going to have disadvantage and never hit them. So I'm going to negate Dawnbringer from time to time as well. Not every time, just sometimes. Just to make them remember, hey, it's not always going to be a cakewalk. So there you go, guys. That's our first session. That's kind of transitioned into a more, I guess, taking multiple stories and putting them together. But I really like the way that the Mick the Peddler encounter went inside of the Foaming Mug Inn. That was really fun. And that's, the party was actually genuinely worried, I thought. And it was especially funny to see the faces on some of those guys as they were kind of like rubbing their head going, oh man, what did you get us into, and all this other stuff. Because a couple people, they didn't know that, only Eton and Puck, remember, only Eton and Puck, those two knew that they saw him stealing. And the others didn't know, but when they found out, holy cow, man, that was crazy. So, all right, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Join the conversation down below. Put some comments down there. Do you guys think I should add anything else? Give me some ideas. More minds are better than one. So what do you guys think? You guys like the transition? I do. And I think the players are really going to like it also. Like I said, I'm not only going to do Yawning Portal stuff. I'm going to do some Kobold Press Book of Layers stuff. I'm also going to do some 4th edition Dungeon Delve adventures, and I'm going to have to convert them from 4th edition to 5e, which is really easy. And I think the game they'll enjoy it more than they already are. All right, guys. Well, I'm out of here. We'll see you in 2 weeks with the next campaign diary. And until next time, keep it savage and keep rolling those 20s.